Another common problem I have seen over various code bases is poor method signatures. So basically what I mean by that is, it's like you have a method called getCustomer, but the parameter it gets is an airplane, which is actually not an airplane object, it's an integer. And what that method returns is not a customer, it's an orange. Now, as much as it sounds like a joke, it's so true. I have seen a million examples of methods like that. Let's take a look at a real-world example. So this method is called parse. It gets a command of type integer and returns void. What is wrong with this method? Typically, parse means getting a string and converting that to a different object. For example, you might have a parse method that gets a string representation of a datetime and then it returns a datetime object. So the problem with this method is that its parameter should be of type string and its return type should be an integer, not void. Okay, now let's jump into Visual Studio and see a more interesting example of a method with a poor signature and how to refactor that. Okay, this example is called PoorMethodSignatures that you can find in the Solution Explorer under PoorMethodSignatures folder. Let's take a look here. We've got this run method. In this method, we create a new user service and we use its getUser method. But take a look at how we call this method. In the first one, we send a username password and a flag of true. In the second one, we send username with null and false. What does it mean? I cannot tell without looking at the implementation of that method. And that's where we fail. There is a code smell here. So let's go to the implementation. How we do that? We put the cursor on the method name and press Ctrl B. There you go. ReSharper brings us here. So the third parameter, that ugly boolean, was login. So if login is set, we try to find the user in the database. In this case, I'm using Entity Framework DB context. If you don't know about Entity Framework, do not worry. All I'm trying to say here is if that user exists, then we set its last login date to current date time and return it. Now, if login is set to false, we're not going to log in the user. We just try to find it in the database and return it. The first problem with this method is that it's doing two things. It's responsible for logging in a user and also returning it. And that is dependent on the third parameter here. Typically, not always, Boolean flags in methods are code smells, because usually, depending on if they're set to true or false, that method will be doing different things. And the more Boolean parameters we have in a method, the more complex that method becomes. There will be so many different execution paths depending on various combinations of these Boolean flags, so try to avoid them as much as you can. Now back to the business, let's see how we can get rid of this Boolean flag here. Well, I look at this method and I know if it's set to true, this method tries to log in a user. So what I like to do here is to extract this piece of code and put it in a separate method, call it login. This way the code will be more expressive, more intention revealing. Now, how do we move the code around? The poor way of doing that is to come here and create a new method like public user login, whatever, and then copy paste or cut and paste code there. That's not a good way. Let's see what's a better way. So we come here. I want to select this block of code. And to do that, I press Ctrl and W. This is ReSharper's context-sensitive selection, and it's extremely powerful. So in this case, it knows that I'm at the beginning of a line, so when I press it, it selects the entire line. Depending on where I put the cursor, the selection will be different. Now we can extend the selection by keep pressing Ctrl and W. So I press it one more time. Now because these few lines are all close together, ReSharper automatically selected all of them. See, it's much faster than going here and pressing Shift and down arrow and selecting like that. I just put the cursor anywhere here and press Ctrl W a few times. There you go. If you made a selection and you went too far, let's say like this, you can come back with Ctrl Shift W. So you see, we can continue the extension and select the entire method or the entire class. It's extremely powerful. So let's get back here. Now we want to extract a method from that. How we do that is using extract method refactoring. ReSharper has a lot of refactoring commands, and you can activate them by pressing Ctrl, Shift, and R. Take a look here. We see this refactor this item, and under that we've got extract method. Depending on what you have selected and where your cursor is, you're going to see different options here. In this case, because I have selected a block of code, ReSharper thinks I want to extract a method. So let's go ahead with that, press enter. Now we see this dialog box. Let's put that here. So ReSharper thinks I want to extract a method called user, which returns whatever is selected here and takes these parameters. And you can see the preview of that method here. So this is what that method is potentially going to look like. I want to change the name here. User is not a good method name. So I'm going to change it to login. And now let's take a look at the parameters. So ReSharper automatically selected username and password. Most of the time, depending on what you select, ReSharper is intelligent enough to select the right parameters for you. But do not always trust that. Always double check. See if those parameters make sense. Okay, so username and password is fine here. I'm not going to deselect that. But let's just, for preview, see what happens. I'm going to deselect password. See, that's gone here. And ReSharper tries to create a temporary local variable here called password. That's not what we want. So let's go back here. If you want to make a method virtual, you can just tick this box here. And if you want to change the access modifier, you can use this drop-down list here. I want to make it public because I want this to be called from the outside. And by the way, you don't have to use the mouse. Preferably use your keyboard. You can just move around with the tab. In this case, I use the mouse because I wanted you to see what's happening here. So let's go ahead. Look what happened. ReSharper created a new method called login, takes a username and password, returns a user, and all that code we selected earlier is moved here. Now the original method is changed in a safe way. So if login is set to true, we're going to call that login method here. So we have not broken any functionality. We just refactored it. Okay, now let's see what's the benefit of that. So get back to our run method here. Instead of sending this ugly argument here and calling getUser, I'm going to call the new method login. It's more meaningful. It's more intention revealing. And login doesn't have a true parameter here. So it just takes a username and password and returns a user. That's much better, isn't it? Now let's get back to our getUser method again. So there you go. I want to see what are the clients of this method. Who's referencing that? So to do that, I press Alt and F7. ReSharper brought us here to this line. So this is the only reference in this project where we are using the getUser method. If you have more than one reference, you're going to see a dialog box. In fact, let me quickly show you that. So I'm going to duplicate this line here and change the name of this parameter to some ugly name temporarily. Now back to getUser. Press Alt and F7. Look. In this dialog box, you see there are two references and they're both in PoorMethodSignatures class. Let's double click each. You see where they're referenced. Okay, let's get rid of that. Okay, so currently I have only one usage of that getUser, and that usage is sending false here, which means it's not going to use the login functionality. So basically we migrated the old method that was here to use the new login method. So it's safe to get rid of this block of code here because this method is no longer used for the login feature. So I come here and use Ctrl W for quick selection. This is the only part of this method that we need. So I'm going to cut that, put that here on the top, and again with Ctrl W, select this entire block and get rid of it. But our job is not finished. Let's take a look at this login parameter here. So I'll put the cursor here. Again, I want to see who's referencing that. So Alt and F7. ReSharper tells me usages of login were not found. which means nowhere in this method we are using login. So we can get rid of it. How do we do that? The poor way of doing that is to go and delete it like this. Let's see what happened. Here we got a red underline because this method is setting the third parameter which no longer exists. So let's revert that. A better option is to use the safe delete. So again, I activate resharper refactoring options with Ctrl-Shift-R. And here we have a safe delete. When I use this option, see what happens. We have to confirm it. Yes. Note that this method, this reference was automatically updated and we didn't get a compile time error. Let's repeat the same thing with password. So let's go here. Again, Alt and F7. Usages of password were not found. So Ctrl-Shift-R, safe delete, confirm, gone. Now let's take a look at our client code. See, we have two method calls here. One is login, which is very intention revealing. It needs a username and a password. And we have another method, getUser, which simply gets a username. Plus we broke down a method that was getUser here that was doing two different things into two separate methods. These methods are smaller and more maintainable, more intention revealing. So there is less guesswork. Anyone who reads that code, anyone who looks at these two methods, they know what is going on. They don't have to look at the implementation of that method to see what getUser means. What is that third parameter? What is null? What is true or false? So what I want you to take away from this lecture is when writing your methods, always double check or triple check the return type, the name of the method, and its parameters. Make sure all these three elements are logically related. Do not have methods that get something that is irrelevant and return something that is irrelevant. And if you see methods like that in your code base, use resharper safe refactoring commands to get rid of those code smells. In the next lecture, we'll take a look at the large parameter list of methods.